Sally, Storey, wow, what a privilege it is to have you here. Your name is synonymous with lighting. I've been told to introduce people properly, and looking across your projects, the institutions you let the lighting on, the Berkeley, Lord's Cricket Ground, Connaught,
yes.
And hugely in the residential sector. How did you come into lighting?
I feel enormously privileged that even now, A, to be speaking to you, but also talking about my passion, because I love light as much today as I did when I started. So I've always been interested in design. I did physics, chemistry and maths at A-level because my stringing of words together wasn't that good. But I wanted to be in art, so I read architecture at university at Bristol, which I loved because that brings your art and science together. And I was fascinated by light and did a thesis in my second year. And that, nobody studied light at that time. And that really brought me in touch with different people. There was new companies starting. There was Urco Lighting, Concord Lighting, and there was a man called John Cullen who had just left the BBC doing filming and lighting for shows, and had set up a residential lighting arm on his own from a living room. And I went to see him and interview him as part of my thesis. I go up to this living room on the first floor in Smith Street off the King's Road and start to interview him. And then he says to me, I'm second year architecture, mind you, look at that corner shop across the road. Will you design my showroom for me to demonstrate light? And that was really the beginning of the whole story, in that I said yes, walked out of that interview terrified about what I'd just said, thinking, but I'll make it work. Went back the next day and started designing that showroom, and that became like a lighting pod, which I always feel is essential to demonstrate how lighting works, because it's an inner emotion, and when it changes around you, you feel different. And so I designed the showroom that helped also with my thesis, and thereon continued working every holiday for him, drawing up all the plans for new lighting.
Did you find yourself in those early years noticing lighting? Had it always been something that you'd noticed?
Lighting in those days was very much not considered in residential. It was very much considered for museums. There were some great quality lights, but they were all huge. And one of the things that John and I began to feel was we were sourcing all over Europe for lighting products. And it was really in its infancy. It was the beginning of halogen. And so that was the first lighting revolution. Halogen brought miniaturization. And what was really interesting was when I left university after my third year, I had the option of you go to study on architecture, but John Cullen offered me a job and 10% of the business to come and work for him then and there. So I really haven't looked back, and I've never worked anywhere else. And what it did mean was that at that stage, we started thinking, how can we take the knowledge of the museum lighting, miniaturize it with the new halogen source, and create a totally new toolkit of lighting that we could use in residential, and that's what we did.
What part of the process do you most enjoy?
Over the years, I've been into many houses. One of the things that lighting is, and I think that I love in design, is I love contemporary design and I love very traditional design. So understanding the difference between the modern and the historic is very important. The other thing is people's aspirations. Lighting can be very over the top, or it can be very subtle. So one of the things I have to do is understand the brief and what the client wants, and then deliver it. And that's probably one of the most fun things with lighting is sometimes I can be very theatrical, sometimes I can be very subtle, but it's trying to deliver what the client wants and create the right lighting mode with whatever light source. So one time it might be a whole series of downlights or uplights. The next it might be what light source I use within a chandelier, and could I incorporate a mini downlight within it to create the effect I want.
Sometimes one speaks to chefs or people who build technology and they look at their product and there's always this like never-ending sense of frustration that it's not, they want to change this and that, i.e. things can never feel complete. Do you relate to that, or do you feel like you reach that sense of completeness?
I'd say that if you're a designer, you've never finished. Because as a designer, there are always new influences coming. So having explained how we designed the miniature pole spring for the halogen revolution, I then adapted that to have the LED revolution. That was another huge revolution within the industry, in that suddenly there was even greater miniaturization and energy efficiency. So therefore, my whole toolkit had to change. And it gave new opportunities. And even today, I'd say I'm always looking at how I can make things even better, how I can do things differently, how I interpret things differently. And that's probably why I never get bored.
What a privilege for you to have this passion and to be able to work in so many different environments. Because you've actually been a huge innovator on the lighting product itself, haven't you? Talk to us about that, and perhaps, I know that there are some very small lights that you've been focusing on recently. We'd love to hear a bit more about your impact in the space and perhaps what that might look like going forward.
I'd say the first revolution was with the halogen, as I explained, where we miniaturized the downlights that were being used that previously had been quite big, therefore only suitable for hotels, would seem rather ungainly in a house. And we miniaturized them, and we also set the light source back to make sure that there was no glare from it. That downlight that we did has probably inspired lots of other manufacturers.
Modesty.
And I don't think they perfected them to the level of glare control that we still have. Then it took me on to the idea of uplighting. Before, you could only uplight with huge great fixtures. I miniaturized that. With halogen, it wasn't perfect because the light source got very hot, so therefore was not ideal. But with LED technology, it's actually miniaturized and it's low heat, which meant that I could achieve all those effects of uplighting walls, uplighting architectural features like arches, or fireplaces, and introduce little pockets of light to places that people hadn't thought about before. And then I also did the floor washer, which sounds an odd thing to do. Used to be a brick light as a guidance light, very commercial in the wall. And we were doing a kitchen which had a scoop handle. I said, light could be like that, and then light the stairs. So I was probably one of the first to do a floor washer that lit the stairs. And at that time, I also named them after my children. So I had a Kazala for the floor washer, a Luca for the uplight, and then actually I did a lantern light for my son Alexander, but sadly that's now been discontinued. But being able to develop those miniature products really was wonderful. Now take that forward, miniaturization's increased, and you asked me about the smallest product. We now do something called the minim, literally the size of a 5p piece that can be recessed into a shelf and beautifully light an object. So the role of lighting and how I can use new technology is evolving all the time.
So interesting. On the occasions I've been to someone's home who's an obsessed curator, you can see how much thought goes into a space and the attention to detail. Are there some times where you've been in an unusual home, or maybe it's a commercial environment, where there's been an object that's been quite unusual and you just know, gosh, that's going to involve a complete new way of thinking?
I'd say, particularly thinking of art curating and curating for the home, often the first introduction somebody might come to think about lighting their home is because they have an art collection and therefore they want to light it correctly. But art these days is so different. So from doing the picture light, and we do a lovely Wallace picture light that lights in a more contemporary way, in a very slim classical way, a picture, ideal for more traditional pictures or even contemporary pictures as a picture light. Or it's from a spotlight in the ceiling, whether surface or recessed. Or sometimes the picture might benefit from a framing projector where the object is entirely framed with light and there is no spill light, and it really draws its attention to that. Or what happens these days is some pieces of art are internally lit. So you've got to balance those that are lit internally, or could be video art, with those that one's lighting oneself. And sometimes one has to make the balance of it. Which ones do you have where to make the ambience within the room correct?
And you've worked on quite a few boats as well. They're extraordinary for a few reasons, but probably also for the budget. Can you think of a time where you have been on a project where they've just given you such creative room to do what you want and you've approached things in a quirky way?
I'd say lighting really in a design team is a collaboration. I find that when I'm working, and super yachts is something I both help to judge and I've designed several of, they're rather amazing in that they're almost like doing a piece of the ultimate jewellery box or piece of joinery, because quite honestly, everything is inbuilt. It's a millimetre is almost the tolerance. You're able to do things that you might not normally be able to integrate lighting into because you're at such a high tolerance. It does give you an expression to try different things, light, and it's also, everything is inbuilt. So you're not, in an old historic building, you can't suddenly inbuild the lighting because you've got to keep the historic fabric intact. So when you're designing a super yacht, you're designing everything from scratch. So every little detail is fully integrated. And in a way, that makes it so special. And therefore, there are certain effects you can do, whether it's backlit, front lit, even cycles of mood control, that might be harder in a more historic environment.
Speaking of environments, some environments are so well lit, and there's a lot of commentary on urban environments. Obviously, more people live in urban environments than before. And I guess if we take a step back, lighting, it sits everywhere we go, right? Outdoors, indoors. I've seen your fantastic lighting for garden. Which environments do you think lag behind on lighting where you're really earing to get work in?
Weirdly enough, originally the super yachts were behind the houses because they hadn't developed to the same criteria. I think what is really interesting, and also LED and the environment we're in now, has been a revolution that everybody talks about. Everybody has to use LED now because of the energy considerations. What most people don't notice or don't know about is how to select the correct LED. I say this because there are so many bad LEDs out there you can buy from the supermarket. You bring home, you walk into your house, you plug them in, the colour's too white, it doesn't dim, it actually looks grey. And in fact, one's environment, you almost want to turn it off and put the candles back on.
Awkward when it's your host. And, you must have to keep your mouth quite stern on lots of occasions.
I'm often asked when I go in, is this all right? I often don't really want to say too much. I think the hard thing is that understanding what, and that's why in lockdown I wrote a book called Inspired by Light that the RIBA asked me to write to help interior designers and architects understand about light. Now, the basis of that was a lot of people understand about the colour temperature, but weirdly enough, some people call 3000 Kelvin warm. I'd call it cold. 2700 is meant to be warm, and I'd call that every day. And I call 2,200 or 2,400 warm. And most people haven't even heard of that. So if you think of the old tungsten bulb, that was 2,400. Yet now we're living in a colder environment. the restaurant you want to sit in is the one that is candlelit, even today as you're walking down the street. So I felt my whole book and life is to explain to people how to achieve the right colour and the right ambience, because too much out there is being sold as warm and is really cool and not the right colour temperature. But it goes beyond that. Most cheap or cost-effective LED, as people call it, in the supermarkets, don't consider how the light renders the colours it's lighting. Daylight is 100%, halogen was 100%, and LEDs, when they started, rendered things at about 70%. Hence, their colour rendition index, which it is, meant everything appeared grey. So although you saw the colours, somehow when you walked into an environment, I wonder if you've ever felt this, you feel like the energy is being sucked out of you.
Unfortunately, yes.
But sometimes when you walk into an environment, and that's what I've been concentrating in, that all our lights are above 95%, everything seems alive, and you're not really quite sure why. And most people don't understand that. They've grabbed one idea, but they don't realise that light also has to render everything at the right 95% to make you feel alive. And it's something that you'd understand if you're filming, but if you're just buying a lamp, you don't know that, and you're not educated to know that. And that's one of my reasons that I'm trying to educate people, because it's really important to understand that it's the quality of light, not just the colour temperature. Sorry, that might be a bit scientific.
No. The education piece is clearly a challenge. We've had the privilege of being here in your incredible studio. Light can do a lot, and it can really connect people to spaces. Connection's a big theme at the minute for people, and what it can give people. I had an incredible chap on the podcast talking about how influential the reptilian part of the brain is, and how it's your basic human needs. It seems that's really linked to light in the sense that light can really connect you to your environment and really change certain things. What does that connection, how can light connect people to their environment, and what are the different ways in which it can do that?
Light, to me, is an emotion you feel. So when I'm showing people in a book or different effects, you have a visual experience of seeing flowers lit, not lit, and it has one impact. If you're in the space and see the flowers lit and not lit, you feel something internally. And one of the things that we've looked at particularly is, and there's a lot of talk about, is the circadian rhythm, in that the light changes from dawn to dusk. It goes from a warm colour at dawn, it then becomes much cooler and brighter through the day, and then it becomes much warmer at night. And we all know that those studies have been done, hence our computers now changing from a whiter light to a warmer light, because they know that the way that the body works is you actually want to go through that rhythm altogether. And there's been a lot of research also in health situations where a hospital environment might be cold all the time, and they're now trying to introduce that rhythm into those spaces. And that's also something in a way I try to do within the home, not in the same scientific way as thinking of the hospitals, because in the day you've got daylight normally. We've normally got a house with windows, so that is providing the whiter light. So that's why I concentrate so much on creating the warmth and the interest at night, because otherwise you're going to continue with the whiter light in the evening when really we're wanting to create the warmer light. Yeah. So that's why I use a variety of lighting temperatures within the home to make that connectivity and make you feel more welcomed and relaxed in the evening rather than still on the go.
So interesting. And in fact, Brian Johnson, who's leading the longevity movement on how to live longer, he's big on his red light therapy, knowing very little about using different colours, for example, in environments where you want to sleep. Do you think that we are doing things in the wrong way, given the technology we have now and the capacity to be able to personalise light, or on pre-sleep mode and whatnot? Are we doing well in general? Is the cost of these systems far too high? What does the future look like, in your optimal view?
I think we're still in the discovery zone,
Okay.
I'd say, because a lot of the way the technology could be used, you have to think, how can you put it into a situation you could use in the home? So that's why I do it by combining sources. But really, it's very much out there. I think what's good is it's being talked about. I think the more one explores and talks about it, the more one thinks of applications. And I think that's really exciting. I think the more one thinks what lighting can do to an interior, you think, oh my goodness, or an exterior. And as you say, the whole idea of lighting the exterior is interesting. In London, to me, going back, is that I feel that it's like creating an extension of a home. You can light, if you've got a small kitchen and you've got a backyard, you light that, you've got double the space at night because your visual impression goes out. There are other things, though, the dark skies at night brigade, which I think is really wonderful. We want to see more stars. So you've got to think in the countryside, you don't have to light everything. You're not using, except for a party, maybe the garden all the time. So how do you contain it? So I think the whole of life is about understanding how the tools you can use, how you can develop them and use them to the best ability. So in the urban environment, I probably use exterior more, or in an internal courtyard, and less in the countryside to keep that valuable darkness still alive.
So fascinating. Going back to this conversation I had earlier, it was in this rehabilitation centre, dogs were given, and it was very clear how amazing the therapeutic impacts they can be. Lighting must change so much in terms of your people's mental health, and probably have a physical impact as well, make you feel calmer, and it's probably massively utilised as in general. You work across so many different projects, be it an office or a restaurant, nightclub, airport, homes from here to Kazakhstan and back. There must be so many different goals that you're told to focus on, and therefore so many interesting learnings in terms of what light can achieve. So for example, in a commercial environment, getting people to look at objects to be sold, for example, or facilities to be used, or people to maybe find their way around a complex environment. Talk to us about the surprises of what light can actually, how it can change human behaviour.
I think human behaviour is affected because lighting is an emotion. It's affected by lots of one's senses. So for the office to be bright and crisp is probably quite good because it makes you more alert. I think that's why changing the environment to a softer, warmer environment when you go home is so important. So if it was crisp and white, you might still feel you're in the office, so it doesn't introduce your calming feel that, oh, now I can relax. So I think lighting and the way it changes is really important. I think it's also psychologically, as you're walking down a road, I think I mentioned earlier, if you see the candlelit warm restaurant and then the cold one, even if it's beautifully designed, which one do you want to go into? The warm one. Also, if you think about retail, really interesting, been involved in retail. One is, what colour do you use for your face? To get the impact. You want to make a flattering light. If you look in the makeup department, you don't want it to be too cold, you want it to be warmer. If you're in the fruit and veg department, the meat needs to be slightly a warmer colour temperature, but fish could even be cooler, 3,500, even 4,000, so that the silveriness of the freshness looks better. So lighting and the colours you use can really influence the space. Also, if you've got natural light coming in, you might need a slightly cooler light so it blends more easily. If you've controlled the environment and you've got a totally warm environment and totally undaylit, then suddenly you have full control to make that person feel different in their mood. So lighting, I certainly will have changed the colours, obviously keeping the right colour rendition index to suit what I'm lighting. And you're right, there's so much study right now, and there's so much available, but in a way that's also the danger. There's too much available that people don't know how to use effectively and gets thrown in without actually being used properly.
Super interesting. And for people who don't have a big budget, they live in an urban flat, let's say a 2-bedroom flat, lights already built into the walls. Are there 3 top tips that you have?
I would definitely, if all they've got to start with is a pendant, the thing that I probably, in the centre, I would say go for a high quality dim to warm lamp or something and a dimmer. I would also plug in low level lights, or I would potentially, you could remove the pendant, plug in low level lamps, and therefore get that soft side light again with a soft lamp. Even introduce some uplighting in the corner with a plug-in light source. You could then potentially, and I've done this before, use that light source even with a track to light one's art to create an immediate impact. I know I did in my early days when a few people first got their homes. We did a bit of lighting and somebody thought, so we took out the central pendant, I lit the pictures and we added the lamps. And everybody came into his house and thought we'd redecorated the house. So it made an immediate impact. I also remember here we have a wonderful kitchen display, which is really an IKEA kitchen. A client came in, couldn't afford the lighting budget, decided, actually, I'll buy an IKEA kitchen and light the kitchen properly. And she said afterwards, she said it was the best decision in that everybody came in to think, oh my God, this looks amazing. And the budget was less. So there's always tricks you can do, but don't underestimate lighting. It's a lot cheaper in many ways to change the way things look. And even in this showroom, which I might share with you later, you can see how cheap tiles look rather magnificent when lit.
There's no way about it. It's art, what you do. And you're the artist. But we're now going to jump into some quick fire questions before you really show us how all these things work. 3 things you get joy from. The L word can't be used.
Okay, could I say natural light?
Yeah, you can.
It feels like desert island. No, natural light has inspired me right from the very beginning, and I absolutely. So natural light, food stroke taste, and sound, although I'd say I'm probably, no, yes, taste, so food and taste, natural light, texture.
Wonderful. A mantra you want to embrace now would be?
I feel life is so challenging, live for the moment.
Live for the moment. Words of wisdom. A favourite book, artist, or film that isn't obvious?
I'd say Alvar Aalto.
Okay.
Finnish architect. I'm half Finnish, and he inspired me to read architecture in the first place. And so probably his art and the way he designed things has been such a important guidance for me. Amazing flower vase that makes flowers always land in the right place.
Something you want to learn more about?
Everything.
You've had a difficult call, a bit of work you really wanted hasn't quite ended up working out in the way you expected. How do you swing back?
Life has its challenges, you just solve them. You solve them, nothing. If no one dies, that's the important thing. And I can't now, I'm trying to think what would be, really, if I get a bad call, I cope with it. I don't really, it's not the end of the world. Yeah. Basically, it's not the end of the world, and there's something around the corner. And I'm a really positive person. I probably keep smiling.
You can add 1 item on your bucket list today, what would it be?
More holidays.
Where to?
Everywhere.
Something you wish you knew when you were younger?
Not to worry.
The world works in a certain way today. It could be perhaps in relation to lighting, but if you could change one thing, what would you change? Maybe it's better IP protection on the lights.
Better IP. I think if there's one thing in the world to change today is communication and making people listen. I think it's such a sad world sometimes. I think if only people talk to each other.
Love that. Woohoo! We've done it. We've done
I was-
it. Sally, you probably have to sign so many NDA given the type of clients and businesses you work for. I don't know how people get your time. I don't know how I've got your time today. But can you think of any interesting stories of people you work with?
I feel so privileged in my life to work for so many people, most of whom I can't talk about, as life is. But one of the early ones that I did, which always sticks in my mind, partly because in my mind he was a god, was David Bowie. I did his flat in New York, and I so remember doing the setup at the end of the lighting, the commissioning aspect, to make sure it was all right. They were unpacking, and I'm just saying, is this scene set all right? And David Bowie says, come and sit beside me on the sofa and tell me, what do you think of my new album? And I really was speechless, did not know what to say. And that has probably been one of my most iconic moments still to this day.
Wow. One of many stories, I'm sure. Thank you so much. It's been such a privilege having you on, and hopefully you've inspired many listeners to probably follow their passion. But one final thing I wanted to ask you is, because you've clearly been open to learning about this space and following your curiosity when you were younger, do you feel, is there a message there for people looking for something they love to do?
I'd say, in the end of the day, follow your heart. It's been a privilege for me to love what I do today as much as I did in the beginning. And if you do have a passion, to spend most of the time, when you think about it, working, and you love it, that's such a privilege. That's more of a privilege than all the money in the world.